Bind, torture, kill. Three words that would strike fear into Wichita, Kansas, for decades. Behind the mask of a family man and church leader lived one of the most sadistic serial killers in modern history. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the oldest of four sons. On the surface, he was a normal Midwestern boy, raised in a working-class family, attending church, helping with chores. But deep inside, something twisted was already taking root. From an early age, Rader displayed disturbing behavior. He admitted later to torturing animals, tying up cats, hanging dogs. These cruel acts were his first experiments in control, suffering, and death. Rader also developed violent sexual fantasies. He obsessed over bondage, imagining women tied, gagged, and helpless. He kept these thoughts hidden, presenting himself as polite and ordinary. Rader joined the U.S. Air Force in the 1960s. After service, he returned to Kansas, married Paula Dietz in 1971, and started a family. By all appearances, he was a devoted husband and father. He attended church, worked steady jobs, and eventually became president of his local congregation. But behind closed doors, his fantasies grew darker. January 15, 1974, Wichita, Kansas. On that cold morning, Dennis Rader made his move. He had been stalking a family on the Oteros for weeks. Joseph and Julie Otero lived with their children in a modest home. Rader cut the phone line, entered through the back door, and confronted the family at gunpoint. He forced them into submission using fear and control. Then, in a sequence of methodical cruelty, he murdered them one by one. Joseph and Julie were strangled with cord. Their children, Joseph Jr., 9, and Josephine, 11, were also killed. Josephine was hung from a basement pipe, left to die slowly in terror. This was BTK's first massacre. 4 lives wiped out in a single morning. The crime scene shocked Wichita. It was brutal, calculated, unlike anything the community had ever seen. But police were baffled. There was no clear motive. Nothing was stolen. It seemed the killings were done for pleasure. The city was gripped with fear. And for Dennis Rader, that fear was intoxicating. Rader was not content to kill in silence. He wanted recognition. He wanted control not just over his victims, but over the entire city. Later that year, he left a letter hidden in a public library book. In it, he claimed responsibility for the Otero murders, describing them in chilling detail only the killer would know. He signed the letter with 3 words that would define him forever: bind, torture, kill. The media dubbed him BTK. BTK had announced himself. He was not just a killer, he was a performer, demanding an audience, and Wichita was now trapped in his theater of terror. Over the next year, police scrambled for leads. The Otero murders haunted detectives, but BTK seemed to vanish. Then in 1974, Rader struck again. This time, his victim was Catherine Bright, a 21-year-old college student. Rader broke into her home and ambushed her and her brother. He shot her brother, Kevin, who miraculously survived. But Catherine was not so lucky. She was stabbed and strangled to death. Kevin later gave police a description of the attacker: a man in his 20s or 30s, with a cold, emotionless expression. But there were no suspects, no matches. BTK was evolving. Each murder fed his fantasies. Each survivor's terror was fuel. And still, he taunted police. Throughout the late 1970s, BTK began a twisted correspondence with the media and law enforcement. He mailed letters, poems, and drawings describing his crimes. He named his projects Project Otero, Project Catherine. He revealed in the details, mocking police for failing to catch him. The communications were laced with narcissism. BTK compared himself to other infamous killers, seeking fame among monsters. Each time a letter arrived, Wichita froze. People locked their doors. Parents kept children inside. A city lived in fear of a phantom who signed his notes with 3 chilling initials, BTK. Dennis Rader, husband, father, church president, had now become something else entirely. A shadow that haunted Wichita, a killer who demanded to be seen, and a predator who knew how to vanish into everyday life. But this was only the beginning. Dennis Rader wanted the world to know his name. He was not just a killer, he was a performer. And with every letter, every murder, every taunt, BTK played a cruel game with Wichita, a game that lasted decades. To his neighbors, Dennis Rader was the definition of normal. He worked in home security, a chilling irony, and later as a compliance officer, notorious for being overly strict about lawn regulations and permits. He married Paula Dietz, raised 2 children, and led his Lutheran church as president of the congregation. He was seen at Sunday services, potluck dinners, and local events. But inside, Rader carefully maintained his fantasy world. He built what he called his trolling grounds, cruising neighborhoods, watching women, learning their schedules. He stalked them patiently, choosing victims who fit his fantasies of control and submission. By day, Dennis Rader was a family man. By night, he was BTK. Rader's next known victim was Shirley Vian, a 24-year-old mother of 3. On March 17, 1977, he broke into her Wichita home. Shirley's children were present, and he locked them in a bathroom, promising not to hurt them if they stayed quiet. Then he turned on Shirley. He tied her up, placed a plastic bag over her head, and strangled her to death. The children eventually escaped, but the damage was done. Another family shattered. Just 3 months later, Rader struck again. Nancy Fox, a 25-year-old secretary, was targeted after Rader stalked her routine for weeks. He broke into her duplex late at night. When Nancy returned home, he confronted her at knife point, tied her up, and strangled her. But this time, BTK did something chillingly bold. Instead of waiting for his crime to be discovered, he called the police himself. On the recording, his voice was calm, almost casual. "Yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox. That's correct. I'm sorry. I think she's dead by now." This phone call revealed something crucial. BTK didn't just want to kill. He wanted to orchestrate the discovery, to be part of the fear. Nancy Fox's murder and the killer's brazen call plunged Wichita into full-scale panic. After Nancy Fox, BTK continued his twisted correspondence. He wrote poems, grotesque verses describing his crimes, and mailed them to TV stations and newspapers. One of his most infamous poems was called "Oh Death to Nancy," a taunting rhyme about Nancy Fox's final moments. He also sent packages with drawings, maps, and word puzzles, playing mind game with investigators. Rader wanted to be infamous. He wanted to be feared. And the more the media covered BTK, the more he thrived. But despite all his taunts, police were no closer to catching him. Then suddenly, BTK vanished. After his letters in the late 1970s, there were no new confirmed murders for years. The city wondered, had he been arrested for another crime? Was he dead? Or had he simply stopped? In reality, Dennis Rader was living his life. He focused on his family, his church, and his job. He raised his children. He appeared normal in every way, but his fantasies never disappeared. He was waiting, watching, planning. Wichita had no idea. The monster was still there. He was just biding his time. For nearly a decade, BTK seemed to vanish. But Dennis Rader had not stopped fantasizing. He was simply waiting until the urge to kill once again became unbearable. In 1985, after years of silence, BTK resurfaced. His victim was 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, a neighbor who lived just 6 doors down from Rader. One spring night, Rader broke into her home, strangled her, and took her body to his church, the very place where he led prayers and preached faith. There in the church basement, he posed her corpse in bondage positions, took photographs, and then dumped her body by the roadside. It was a grotesque blending of his secret sadism and his public mask of morality. Rader killed again in 1986, strangling 28-year-old Vicky Vagerle inside her home. Her husband discovered her dying, but she succumbed to her injuries. Then in 1991, Rader murdered his final known victim, 62-year-old Dolores Davis. By then, BTK had claimed at least 10 lives, and still no one knew who he was. After Dolores Davis, BTK went silent once more. For over a decade, from 1991 to 2004, Dennis Rader appeared to live a normal life. He continued as church president. He worked as a compliance officer in Park City, writing petty citations with the same precision he once used to bind and torture his victims. He watched his children grow. He attended Boy Scout meetings, but deep inside the monster slept, waiting to be woken. In 2004, on the 30th anniversary of his first killings, a local newspaper published an article speculating that BTK had faded into history. Rader couldn't resist. He began sending packages to media outlets and police once again. Letters, photos of victims, even a Barbie doll bound with ropes to symbolize his fantasies. The city of Wichita was thrown back into fear, but Rader made one fatal mistake. He sent a floppy disk to police. Rader asked in a letter if it was safe, if it could be traced. The police lied and said no. On the disk, metadata revealed a deleted file, linked to Christ Lutheran Church, and to one man in particular, Dennis Rader. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested outside his home. Neighbors watched in shock as the friendly church leader and city worker was handcuffed. Inside his home, police discovered a treasure trove of evidence. Trophies from his victims, journals, drawings, and meticulous plans of each crime. The monster had finally been unmasked. What followed stunned the courtroom. Rader did not fight the charges. Instead, he stood in court and gave a calm, detailed confession, recounting each murder in chilling, matter-of-fact detail. He described how he bound his victims, how he strangled them, how he took trophies. There was no remorse, no hesitation, only pride in his own evil. Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences without parole. He now spends his days in solitary confinement at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. The name BTK, bind, torture, kill, remains one of the most feared acronyms in true crime history. What made Rader so terrifying was not just the brutality of his murders, but the mask he wore. The idea that a killer could be hiding in plain sight, a father, a husband, a man of faith. Dennis Rader was not a monster in the shadows. He was the man next door, the one who smiled at you on Sundays. And that is the true horror of the BTK killer.